So if you were to look at the year 1860, right, the most sought after, just highly read geopolitical analyst for a major American capitalist newspaper it was a guy sitting in a dusty London library.
Right, which is just wild to think about.
It is, because his life's work was literally dedicated to dismantling capitalism. And I'm talking about Karl Marx.
Yeah, Karl Marx. And today we are, opening up a stack of sources that I think completely shatters this image we have of Marx and his collaborator, Friedrich Engels, as these quiet, detached philosophers.
Exactly. Like these guys just sitting in an ivory tower. We're diving into the prefaces, the editorial notes, and the exact historical contents of the Marx and Engels collected works.
Specifically, we're locking our radar onto Volume 17.
Right, Volume 17, which covers this really frantic, intense window from October 1859 to December 1860.
And it is just a remarkable window to look through. Because when we examine these specific sources, we aren't looking at guys writing massive, impenetrable theoretical books that won't be read for decades.
No, not at all.
We're looking at men operating as fiery international journalists. I mean, they were working on tight deadlines, they were reacting to breaking news, and fighting in these incredibly high-stakes geopolitical brawls.
But before we get into, how they ended up writing for an American newspaper or the vicious spy scandals in Paris or even the bloodstained streets of Sicily, we need to set the ground rules for today's deep dive.
Yes, this is an absolutely crucial point for you, the listener, as we proceed today. The sources we are analyzing are entirely built on highly charged political philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
The names Marx and Engels carry immense political weight, right?
Oh.
And a lot of baggage today across the entire political spectrum. But our mission in this deep dive is strictly neutral.
Completely neutral.
We are not here to endorse or validate or take sides on any of these 19th century viewpoints. Our goal is to just impartially unpack the fascinating historical, geopolitical, and economic ideas exactly as they're recorded in this specific volume.
Right. We are treating this text as a historical artifact to be understood.
Exactly. Dissecting the arguments they made at the time, not, offering them up as doctrines you should adopt.
Totally. We're putting on our historian hats and examining the evidence. We want to know what they were writing, why they were writing it, and how they analyzed the world in 1860.
And to understand the ideas pouring out of Volume 17, we first have to understand the physical reality of how those ideas were reaching the public in the first place.
Yeah, which is fascinating in itself. The second half of Volume 17 consists of 35 articles written by Marx and Engels throughout 1860. And as I mentioned at the top, they were writing these for the New York Daily Tribune.
Which is just an astonishing historical detail that often gets completely overlooked. I mean, the New York Daily Tribune was a massive, mainstream, progressive American newspaper.
Like one of the biggest.
Yeah. And in 1860, according to the editorial notes in our sources, this paper was their absolute only outlet for writing on political subjects.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because this sounds like a massive paradox.
It does, doesn't it?
I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of this. How did the fathers of communism become star writers for a mainstream American newspaper?
Well,
I'm trying to picture a modern equivalent, right? It would be like a fiercely anti-corporate whistleblower, someone entirely dedicated to dismantling Wall Street, suddenly being handed a primetime slot on a major cable news network.
right. Just because their ratings and their data analysis were too good for the network executives to ignore.
Exactly. Why would an American capitalist editor risk his paper's reputation on a known radical?
It's a great question, and the sources make the dynamic explicitly clear. The editor of the Tribune did not share Marx's political beliefs.
I would assume not.
No, the editorial board in New York was not sitting around trying to foment a proletarian revolution in the United States. They were, progressive anti-slavery Republicans, but they were firmly rooted in the capitalist system.
Right. So why give Marx and Engels the platform? Wasn't there anyone else who could read European trade data?
You'd think so, but it came down to a combination of profound political insight and just unparalleled analytical rigor.
Okay, what specifically were these two giving the Tribune that the paper couldn't get from, say, a more ideologically aligned correspondent?
Well, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the American public in 1860. The world was rapidly shrinking, telegraph lines were starting to connect continents, steamships were crossing the Atlantic faster than ever.
So global markets were becoming deeply intertwined.
Exactly, but global understanding was still incredibly murky. American readers, especially the educated progressive readership of the Tribune, they were desperate for high-level, accurate analysis of European and Asian affairs.
Because they needed to know what the European empires were planning.
Right, because those plans impacted American trade and American security.
So the editor is looking at the landscape of available writers, and he sees Marx and Engels.
Exactly. And Marx and Engels, sitting in London, they had an extraordinary skill set. They were reading multiple languages: German, French, English, Italian, Russian.
Wow, so they could basically read local reports from all over the continent.
Yes. They were obsessively analyzing global trade data, parliamentary reports, military movements. They provided a level of granular geopolitical journalism that simply possessed a higher literary merit and analytical depth than anyone else available at the time.
So the editor just realizes the absolute necessity of publishing them despite the ideological differences.
Yeah, because the quality of the intelligence was just unmatched.
So it was a pure marriage of convenience.
Pretty much, yeah.
The paper needed elite, reliable, global analysis to satisfy its readership and boost circulation, and Marx and Engels desperately needed a megaphone. Not to mention the income, right?
Right.
Because they were living in exile and often in severe poverty.
Precisely. And what a megaphone it was. The sources highlight that they used this massive platform to expose the underlying economic laws of bourgeois society, the mechanics of colonial expansion, and the realities of the working class movement across Europe.
And broadcasting it all to a huge American audience.
Yes, a massive audience.
Let's talk about the reach of that megaphone for a second, because the sources detail how far these articles actually traveled, and it's fascinating.
It really is. Their work was so impactful that it didn't just stay in the daily edition of the paper in New York.
Where else did it go?
The Tribune regularly reprinted their analyses in special editions, like the Semi-Weekly and Weekly Tribune, which went out to readers all across the American frontier.
Oh, wow, so it's going out west, too.
Yep. But it didn't stop there. Their articles actually crossed the ocean back to Britain.
Right. The sources mentioned they were printed in the Chartist People's paper.
Exactly.
Now, for those who might not know, what exactly was the Chartist movement, and why is it significant that their American articles were being reprinted there?
So Chartism was a massive working-class political movement in Britain. It peaked in the 1830s and 40s, and they were demanding political rights and influence for the working classes. Things like universal male suffrage and secret ballots.
Okay, so a very pro-worker democratic movement.
Right. And by 1860, the movement had declined a bit, but the People's Paper remained a crucial organ for working-class political thought in Britain.
So think about the logistics here. Marx is writing in London, sending the article by steamship all the way to New York,
Yeah.
and then the published piece is being sent back across the Atlantic to be read by the British working class in London.
Yes. It's a completely insane transatlantic feedback loop for 1860.
That is wild.
It truly is. And perhaps the most ironic detail in the sources is that their analysis was so sharp, it was even quoted by the rival New York Times.
I love that detail so much. The New York Times quoting Karl Marx, likely without realizing they're amplifying the guy who is in the process of drafting Das Kapital.
Right.
It really proves the point that when your analysis of the raw data is that undeniable, even your ideological competitors are forced to use your homework.
Exactly. The establishment had to pay attention because Marx and Engels weren't just writing like hot-take opinion pieces. They were dissecting the inner workings of capitalism and imperialism in real time.
By looking at the hard numbers.
Yes, military budgets, colonial administration in India and China, the diplomatic maneuvers of the European powers, and they were explaining the economic motives driving all of it.
Okay, so that establishes their public face during this time. They are these high-level international correspondents for the American press.
Right.
But while they are publishing these grand global analyses, the sources reveal that back in Europe, Marx was engaged in a totally different kind of fight.
Oh, a very different fight.
It wasn't about trade data. It was a vicious, internal, and incredibly time-consuming ideological battle. And this takes up the entire first half of Volume 17.
Yes, it does. If the Tribune articles show Marx the global analyst, this massive text, a book-length polemic called Karl Vogt shows Marx the ruthless street fighter.
Yeah, street fighter is a good word for it.
The first half of Volume 17 is completely dedicated to this text, alongside various letters, circulars, and statements Marx wrote to defend himself and the exiled proletarian revolutionaries.
Defending them against the attacks of a man named Karl Vogt. And I'm really hung up on this Vogt guy. The sources dedicate hundreds of pages to him.
They do.
Who was Karl Vogt, and why is Marx spending half a volume and basically an entire year of his life tearing him apart?
Dave.
Because if Vogt is just some random critic, it seems like a massive waste of time for a guy who's trying to map the global economy, you know?
That's exactly how it appears on the surface, and it's why we have to really dig into the mechanics of who Vogt was.
Hmm.
Karl Vogt wasn't a nobody.
Okay.
He was a very prominent German natural scientist and a really well-known democratic politician. He had been a member of the Frankfurt Parliament during the revolutions of 1848.
Oh, so he's a serious figure.
Very serious. So in the eyes of the European public, Vogt was seen as a leading figure of the progressive democratic opposition.
Okay, so he's a big name in the same broad progressive circles that Marx operates in. What did he do to make Marx so angry?
What's fascinating here is that Vogt basically launched a massive defamation campaign against Marx and his associates. He published a series of tracts and articles accusing Marx of being the head of a gang of blackmailers and counterfeiters.
Wait, counterfeiters?
Yeah, he claimed that Marx's secret communist network was just a front for extorting money from people.
Wow. So it wasn't a disagreement over economic theory at all. It was a straight-up character assassination.
A total character assassination, and it was widely circulated in the European press. But Marx didn't just write Herr Vogt to say, hey, I am not a blackmailer.
He went on the offensive.
He went on the offensive with a stunning counteraccusation. Marx accused Vogt of being a paid agent for Bonapartist France.
Specifically, the Second Empire of Louis Napoleon, also known as Napoleon III.
Exactly.
And to understand why this matters, we really have to unpack the geopolitical context of Bonapartism, because the sources frame this as the major threat of the era.
It was a huge threat.
Let's break down Bonapartism. We aren't just talking about a guy with a famous last name and a fancy uniform, right? It's a very specific political strategy.
Correct. So Louis Napoleon was the nephew of the original Napoleon Bonaparte. He was elected president of France in 1848, but a few years later, he staged a coup d'etat and just declared himself Emperor Napoleon III.
Right.
Marx and Engels analyzed Bonapartism as a highly dangerous modern political phenomenon. It occurred when the ruling capitalist class was no longer able to maintain power through traditional parliamentary democracy, but the working class wasn't quite strong enough to take power either.
So there's a stalemate.
Exactly. So the state, led by a strongman figure like Louis Napoleon, steps in and pretends to elevate itself above all classes, claiming to represent the entire nation.
So he styles himself as the ultimate unifier. Like, I'm not on the side of the rich, I'm not on the side of the poor, I am France.
Precisely. But in reality, Bonapartism relied on a very specific, cynical playbook to maintain control. It combined domestic repression with constant foreign policy adventurism.
Which essentially means starting wars.
Starting wars, expanding borders, anything to distract the domestic population. And the key mechanism they used for this, which the sources highlight repeatedly, was political demagogy.
Right.
Specifically, they used what Marx called drivel about nationalities.
I want to really understand the mechanics of this drivel about nationalities because it's such a specific phrase. How exactly did a French emperor use the concept of nationality as a weapon?
So, Louis Napoleon would look around Europe at regions that were oppressed by other empires. For example, Italy being oppressed by Austria.
Okay.
He would then loudly pretend to be the champion of those oppressed nations, claiming France would fight for their national liberation.
But I'm guessing it was a trap.
It was entirely a smokescreen. He had no interest in genuine liberation. He was cynically exploiting these national movements to justify French military intervention.
With the ultimate goal being what?
Expanding France's own imperial borders and influence. He basically used the rhetoric of freedom as a Trojan horse for empire.
Okay, so let's bring this back to Karl Vogt. If Vogt is operating in progressive democratic circles, how on earth does Marx figure out he's secretly a French spy pushing this Bonapartist agenda?
That is the genius of it.
I mean, Marx didn't have access to the French treasury records. Did he just guess, or was he reading the tea leaves of Vogt's public writings?
He was conducting an incredibly rigorous textual and political analysis. Marx noticed that Vogt's recent pamphlets, which were supposedly written from a neutral, democratic German perspective, perfectly mirrored the foreign policy goals of Louis Napoleon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Vogt was arguing that Germany shouldn't worry about French expansionism, and that the only real threat to European freedom was Austria.
I see. So Marx is basically saying, this Vogt guy is running around pretending to be a fellow progressive, but if you strip away all the flowery language and just look at the geopolitical outcome he's advocating for, it benefits exactly one person, and that's the Emperor of France.
Exactly. Marx mapped the rhetoric to the geopolitical beneficiary. He concluded that Vogt wasn't just a misguided progressive, he was a covert intelligence asset.
And this is why Marx spent a year writing a 300-page book about him.
Yes. It wasn't a petty squabble, it was an ideological quarantine. The working class movement was young, it was fragile, and it was highly vulnerable to being co-opted by state powers.
I'm trying to think of a good analogy to explain the stakes here because it feels a bit like a hostile corporate takeover.
Okay, how so?
Well, imagine a giant predatory corporation wants to buy out a smaller, struggling company, right? But instead of making a direct offer, the giant corporation secretly pays off one of the smaller company's trusted union leaders.
Oh, I see where you're going.
So that compromised leader starts telling the workers, hey, we need to strike against our current management, they're terrible. But his actual goal isn't to get the workers a better contract.
Right. His goal is to tank the company's stock.
Exactly. So the giant corporation can swoop in, buy it for pennies, and then just liquidate all the workers' pensions.
That is an excellent analogy, honestly, because it captures the element of covert sabotage and the cynical use of legitimate grievances.
Right.
Louis Napoleon was the predatory corporation. He wanted to use the legitimate grievances of the European democratic movements to weaken his rivals, like Austria.
And Marx saw Vogt as that compromised union leader.
Yes, secretly on the payroll, trying to steer the revolutionary energy of the masses into serving the geopolitical interests of the French emperor. Marx realized that if he didn't expose Vogt, the entire European working class movement could be hijacked.
That makes the stakes so much clearer. Marx wasn't just defending his own reputation, his own ego. He was defending the ideological borders of an entire global movement.
Absolutely.
And the effort he put into this quarantine was monumental. According to the sources, he gathered documents, corresponded with allies all across Europe, tracked financial ties through third parties. I mean, it was an exhausting investigation.
It was. In fact, Engels later looked back on Herr Vogt and described it as Marx's best polemical work. It is a masterclass in dissecting political hypocrisy, analyzing propaganda, and exposing the hidden strings attached to supposedly independent journalists.
And the most incredible part of this whole saga, which the editorial notes confirm, is that history proved Marx completely right.
Yes, it did.
Which is just crazy to me.
A decade later, in 1870, the French Empire fell during the Franco-Prussian War. A new government took over in France, and they opened up the secret government accounts from Louis Napoleon's reign.
And what did they find?
There it was, in black and white. A record showing that Karl Vogt had indeed received a massive secret payout of 40,000 francs from the emperor's secret funds in August 1859.
Marx called it. He called it before he had the physical receipts, just by rigorously analyzing the man's rhetoric and the political forces at play.
It's a stunning validation of his analytical method.
It really is. But the danger of Bonapartism wasn't just isolated to a few paid propagandists like Vogt.
No, not at all.
And that brings us to the next major theme of Volume 17. The Bonapartist strategy, the cynical use of drivel about nationalities, wasn't just a theoretical debate playing out in pamphlets.
Right. It was playing out in real time.
With massive armies in blood and territory on the global map.
Yes. If Vogt was the propaganda wing of Bonapartism, we now need to look at its military wing. And the major focus of Marx and Engels' journalism in 1860 was the fate of Italy.
So we're moving our lens from the defamation battles of Paris and London down to the actual battlefields of the Italian peninsula.
And to understand the sources here, we really need to quickly ground ourselves in the geopolitical reality of Italy in 1859.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Italy was not a unified country. It was heavily fractured. The northern regions, like Lombardy and Venice, were firmly under the brutal control of the Austrian Empire.
Got it.
In the south, you had the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, ruled by the Bourbon monarchy. And in the northwest, you had the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia, which was the most economically advanced Italian state and the one pushing for Italian unification.
Okay, so Piedmont wants to unify Italy and kick the Austrians out. But they aren't strong enough to fight the Austrian Empire alone.
Exactly. Piedmont needed a powerful ally. And this is where Louis Napoleon, our Bonapartist emperor, steps in. He offers to ally with Piedmont to fight Austria.
And the stated goal, like the public rhetoric, was the complete liberation of Italy from the Alps to the Adriatic. This was the War of 1859.
Right.
But based on what we just learned about Bonapartism, we know Louis Napoleon doesn't actually care about Italian freedom. He's using the drivel about nationalities as a smokescreen.
Precisely. And the sources from Volume 17 detail how this war ended in a spectacular, cynical betrayal.
Tell me about the betrayal.
Well, after winning a few costly battles, Louis Napoleon abruptly went behind Piedmont's back and signed a peace treaty with the Austrians at a place called Villafranca.
Let's look at the illustrative details of this treaty because they are staggering. The stated goal was complete liberation, right?
That was the promise.
But after the treaty, Austria still maintained its grip on Venice. So the oppressor is still firmly inside the house.
Yes. And what about the region of Lombardy? Austria agreed to give Lombardy up, but they didn't give it to Piedmont. They gave it to France.
Wait, really?
Yes, and then France, playing this cynical geopolitical broker, handed Lombardy over to Piedmont.
But France didn't do that out of the goodness of its heart.
Not at all. As the fee for this quote-unquote service, France demanded and received two crucial territories from Piedmont, which were Savoy and Nice.
Okay, I want to refine a real estate analogy here to really capture the mechanics of this betrayal, specifically the geopolitical leverage involved.
Go for it.
Imagine you own a house, right? But a violent squatter, which is Austria, has taken over the entire upstairs. You aren't strong enough to kick them out.
Okay.
So you hire a corrupt, mob-connected broker, which is France, who promises to clear the whole house for you.
Right.
The broker goes upstairs, gets into a brief scuffle with the squatter, and then secretly cuts a deal with them.
Yep, behind your back.
The broker comes back downstairs and says, "Great news. I got the squatter out of the master bedroom. I'm giving it back to you." However, the squatter gets to keep the guest room and the upstairs bathroom permanently.
And it gets worse.
Oh, and as my fee for this liberation, I am taking your kitchen and your garage for myself.
Exactly.
You are left standing there with a broken house, a squatter still living upstairs, and you've lost your kitchen and garage to the guy who supposedly helped you.
That captures the mechanics perfectly. France used Piedmont's desperation for unification as leverage to orchestrate a land grab.
It's just unbelievable.
And Marx and Engels exposed this dynamic relentlessly in the New York Daily Tribune. Louis Napoleon used the rhetoric of Italian liberation to justify a war, but his actual goal was territorial expansion for France, grabbing Savoy and Metz.
All while ensuring that Italy remained divided and weak, so a unified Italy couldn't eventually challenge French dominance in the Mediterranean.
It is breathtaking cynicism. The great powers are just carving up the map to suit their own security interests, completely ignoring the desires of the people living there.
But the problem with treating a nation like a square on a chessboard is that chess pieces don't bleed, and they don't fight back.
Right.
By leaving Italy broken and oppressed, the great powers didn't solve the problem, they merely pressurized it. The elite backroom deals didn't extinguish the fire, they just trapped the heat.
And the sources note that because of this diplomatic betrayal, Italy remained one of the main centers of revolutionary ferment in Europe.
Which means an explosion is inevitable. Because while the diplomats in Paris and Vienna are drawing lines on maps, they are completely ignoring the explosive on-the-ground reality of the people actually living under these regimes.
And that takes us from the high-level diplomatic betrayals down to the grassroots explosion in southern Italy.
Right. So if the north of Italy was a geopolitical chessboard, what was happening in the south?
Yeah.
Because the people living there actually thought this was a moment of revolution.
They did. In April 1860, a massive popular uprising ignited in the city of Palermo, on the island of Sicily. This was a rebellion against the regime of the Neapolitan Bourbons who ruled the kingdom of the two Sicilies.
The sources describe this uprising as launching a new stage of bourgeois democratic revolution. Before we go further, can we define that term? What exactly does a bourgeois democratic revolution mean in the context of 1860 Sicily?
Sure. In Marxist terminology, a bourgeois democratic revolution is a historical stage where the primary goal is to overthrow a feudal absolutist monarchy and establish a modern constitutional state with democratic rights.
Okay, usually alongside land reform and national independence.
Exactly. It's called bourgeois because it typically clears the way for modern capitalist development by destroying the old feudal structures, even though the actual fighting is mostly done by the peasantry and the working class.
Got it. So the people of Palermo are rising up to smash the old feudal structures, and Marx was watching this incredibly closely.
Yes, he was.
He wrote a powerful piece for his American audience titled Sicily and the Sicilians. And I have to say, reading the sources, Marx's language here is incredibly intense and graphic.
It is.
He isn't just writing dry economic theory, he's writing a horrifying autopsy of an oppressed region.
He really is. He didn't just report that the people were angry. He wanted to explain to the American public exactly why they were angry by looking at the material economic conditions.
And the sources highlight that the medieval system of land tenure in Sicily was still entirely intact in 1860.
Yes.
Let's break down the mechanics of this medieval land tenure system because it's crucial. How exactly did this extraction machine work?
Well, it was based on massive estates called latifundia. Marx pointed out that virtually all the productive land on the island was owned by a tiny fraction of absentee aristocratic landlords.
Who probably didn't even live there.
Exactly. They lived in luxury in Naples or Palermo.
Yeah.
They didn't manage the land themselves. They leased it out to middlemen, who then subleased it to the actual peasantry.
So you have these tenant farmers who were actually doing the backbreaking work of growing the crops. What was their economic reality?
Their reality was crushing debt peonage. They were forced to pay exorbitant rents in kind, meaning a massive percentage of their harvest went straight to the landlord and the middlemen.
That's brutal.
But that was only half the burden. The Bourbon state then placed brutal regressive taxes on the peasantry to fund the massive mercenary army that was required to keep the peasants from rebelling.
It's an endless, suffocating loop. The peasant grows the food, the landlord takes the majority of it to live in luxury, the state taxes, whatever is left to pay for the soldiers who stand over the peasant to make sure they keep growing the food.
A literal medieval extraction machine.
I mean, the state and the landlords aren't building infrastructure, they aren't improving agricultural technology, they are literally just turning a crank that squeezes wealth out of the peasantry until there is nothing left.
And what Marx highlights in his writings is the scathing critique of how the rest of quote-unquote civilized Europe reacted to this reality.
Right, because when the people of Palermo finally snapped under the weight of this extraction machine and rose up, the Neapolitan authorities responded with horrific violence.
The sources mention military reprisals, they bombarded the city, they slaughtered civilians in the streets.
And what did the great powers do? What did the official diplomatic circles of Europe, who loved to publish declarations about civilization, progress, and liberty, do while Palermo was being shelled?
According to the sources, they show total, callous indifference.
Of course.
The elite diplomats who had just finished carving up northern Italy couldn't care less about the slaughter of peasants in the south.
Marx used this to expose the absolute hypocrisy of bourgeois diplomacy, didn't he?
He did. France and Piedmont cared about national liberation when it allowed them to annex Lombardy or Savoy. But when genuine popular liberation threatened to topple a monarchical regime from the bottom up, they suddenly respected the sovereignty of the Bourbon king and looked the other way.
It's infuriating to read, even 160 years later. But despite that international abandonment, and despite the naval bombardments from their own government, the sources capture something incredibly inspiring.
Maybe they do.
Marx noted the sheer resilience of the Sicilian people. He wrote that their spirit was not broken. Even against the military might of the Bourbons and the silence of Europe, he noted that they battled and still battle for their freedom.
That phrase is crucial. It reminds us that Marx and Engels were not just detached statisticians mapping abstract economic laws. They deeply recognized human agency.
They saw the people behind the numbers.
Exactly. They recognized the raw courage of the working classes and the peasantry. They were documenting a live, unfolding human struggle.
Okay, so this brings up a massive logistical question for me. I'm trying to visualize this. We're talking about two guys, Marx and Engels, who are living in exile in London. They have very little money. Yet in volume 17 alone, they managed to accurately dissect the secret bank accounts of Karl Vogt in Paris, the backroom diplomatic real estate deals of the Italian War in Vienna, and the highly specific medieval tax structure of tenant farmers in Palermo.
It's an incredible feat.
How are they doing this? I mean, without the internet, without a massive staff of researchers, how is their journalism so granular and so accurate?
This is perhaps the most impressive aspect of the sources we were reviewing, and it brings us to the core methodology behind Volume 17.
Let's talk about it.
To understand how they did it, we have to understand how they viewed themselves in relation to what they call the sixth power.
The sixth power. I absolutely love this concept. Let's really unpack what they meant by that, because it frames everything we've talked about today.
In the geopolitical framework of the mid-19th century, every diplomat and newspaper editor talked about the 5 established great powers of Europe.
Which were Britain, France, Russia, Austria, and Prussia.
Correct. These were the empires that controlled the armies, the navies, the treasuries, and the international treaties. They dictated the fate of the world.
Right. So who or what is the sixth power?
The sources refer to the revolution itself, the collective international movement of the working classes, the peasantry, and the oppressed peoples as the sixth power in Europe.
Oh, wow.
It was a real, tangible social force acting against the five established empires.
So they are elevating the scattered, suppressed masses to the same geopolitical status as the British Navy or the Russian army.
Exactly. And Marx and Engels viewed themselves as essentially the intelligence agency and the analytical wing for this sixth power.
That is such a powerful way to frame their work.
They believed their fundamental duty was to understand the deepest secrets of international politics and to expose the machinations of ruling class diplomacy to the masses.
Because the sixth power couldn't fight the great powers with standing armies, but Marx and Engels believed they could arm them with information.
That's exactly it.
But let me push back a bit here. If their stated goal is to act as the intelligence agency for the revolution, isn't there a risk of massive confirmation bias?
That's a fair question.
Like, how do we know they weren't just writing angry op-eds and twisting the facts to fit their communist worldview? What made their analysis actually reliable?
Because they subjected themselves to an intense, almost grueling level of scholarly rigor. They didn't rely on hot takes or ideological rhetoric.
How so?
The sources give us a very specific visual detail that proves this. There is a surviving manuscript from Marx from this period that contains meticulous handwritten extracts from a dense diplomatic history book by a writer named Imre Szabo.
Okay, what was the book?
It was called The State Policy of Modern Europe.
So he's sitting in the British Museum, literally copying down diplomatic history, treaty by treaty, clause by clause.
Yes, they were digging through government blue books, parliamentary debate transcripts, and endless columns of raw trade statistics.
Really putting in the hours.
Absolutely. They were looking for the empirical data to map what Marx called the law of motion of global economics. They wanted to prove, with undeniable facts, that political events, like the betrayal at Villafranca or the bombardment of Palermo, weren't just random acts by kings and generals.
Right. They were driven by underlying economic forces, class interests, and the need for capitalist expansion.
Exactly.
And the sheer volume of output that resulted from this research is just mind-boggling. I want to highlight the physical reality of Volume 17 for a second.
Go for it.
This book covers only a little over a year of their lives, just 14 months. And in that time, the volume contains 45 distinct works. And for you listening, 8 of these works appeared in English for the very first time in this specific collection of the collected works.
The archival work required by historians to compile these texts, translate them from German, French, and Italian, and match them with their original handwritten drafts is just truly phenomenal.
Oh, I can tell you're marveling at the archival metadata.
I am. I really am. But it really is spectacular. When you open Volume 17, you are looking at personal letters coordinating with political allies, drafts of newspaper columns for the Tribune, massive polemical books like Karl Vogt, and highly technical economic drafts.
It's a treasure trove of 19th century thought, preserved in amber.
And the preservation of these documents is vital because it allows us to see their methodology in action. It proves a foundational point for any learner today. Knowledge is most valuable when it is rigorously sourced, empirically tested, and then practically applied to real-world struggles.
They didn't gather data just to know things.
No, they didn't write for the Tribune just to hear themselves talk. They gathered data to equip the sixth power with the truth about how the world actually worked.
So let's synthesize all of this. What does this deep dive into a 160-year-old book mean for us today? In this time we've journeyed through the pages of a major American newspaper where 2 radical exiles somehow became the most trusted geopolitical analysts in the country.
Right.
We navigated the bitter, high-stakes defamation battles of Europe, seeing exactly how state intelligence tries to infiltrate and hijack progressive political movements using the drivel about nationalities.
Yes.
We watched the cynical, leverage-driven real estate deals of the great powers carve up northern Italy, and we stood in the resilient, blood-stained streets of Palermo as the people fought back against a literal medieval extraction machine.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
And we saw it all through the meticulous, data-driven, investigative lens of Volume 17 of the Marx and Engels collected works.
It is a journey that, if you truly absorb their methodology, fundamentally changes how you view the production of news and history.
Absolutely.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final puzzle to mull over.
Mm-hmm.
In our modern era, we are constantly overwhelmed by information overload.
Oh, without a doubt.
We are bombarded 24/7 by superficial political talking points, cable news spin, and endless social media debates about what politicians say they are doing or what their stated moral intentions are.
Which is really just the modern equivalent of Louis Napoleon's drivel about nationalities. It's the smokescreen.
Exactly. So my question to you is this. If you were to apply the strict methodology of Volume 17 to today's world, if you started actively, aggressively ignoring what politicians and corporate leaders say about their motives, and instead look strictly at the underlying economic laws, the structures of land and corporate ownership, the flow of capital, and the hidden geopolitical alliances, how differently would the modern news cycle look to you?
Would the X-ray machine of our political diagnosis suddenly become a lot less murky? Because if we learn anything from Volume 17, it's that the real story is rarely the one being told in the diplomatic press releases or the cable news chyrons.
Right, exactly.
The real story is the one hidden in the ledgers, the trade routes, and the struggle of the people on the ground. Thank you for diving deep with us today.